On a farm, an old donkey one day fell into a well. It was just kind of walking out in the field, and there was a well, and it was investigating it, and it fell down very deep into a dry well. When the owner heard the donkey making noise, he went out to see it, and he wasn't really sure what to do because he realized it would be impossible to get the donkey out of the well. He wouldn't be able to lift the donkey up because it was kind of all going in a spin, and very, very upset. And so what he decided to do was a very difficult decision. He said, well, it's going to starve there. I don't know how to get the donkey out, so maybe we should put the donkey out of its misery. It sounds very cruel, but he thought, well, maybe it would be the best way to handle the situation. So he called some of his neighbors to come, and they all brought a big pile of dirt, and they started taking shovels and throwing them into the well and thinking, okay, we'll just close our eyes and the donkey will, perish at some point. It was old. They said it's way beyond its usefulness anyway. But what happened was they started shoveling the dirt on, and the donkey was taking the dirt and moving around so fast that the dirt all fell off of its back. So little by little, the ground got higher and higher. They just kept putting more and more dirt there, and little by little the donkey started getting lifted up from the ground. It was pretty remarkable, actually, and the people got so excited because they realized that the donkey would be able to live. So a nice happy ending to the story, and a good moral as well, which is that for every situation there is a solution. And most especially when things seem kind of bleak and there might be challenges involved, that there's a way to be able to find, if we're creative, a situation or a solution that's going to help, that will create a possibility for the future. I think that's what the steward had in mind in the gospel reading today. This is a very complicated type of story because it appears at first glance that Jesus is affirming dishonesty. It appears that the Lord is saying, oh yeah, go cheat people out of their money, out of their goods, and that'll get you into heaven. But actually what Jesus is affirming is the cleverness, the creativity of the steward. And actually there was maybe dishonesty there, but everybody ended up on top. You see, for the man who was the steward, he was like a slave. He wasn't really an employee, he was a slave to the master. He probably had a pretty good position because he was in charge of some accounts, obviously the olive oil account and the wheat account for the entire operation. And so what he decided to do when he realized that he was in trouble, that he had done some things maybe that were wrong, he said, well, how can I redeem myself? How do I save my future? Make sure that I have a future. And so he came up with this plan to go to the man with the oil and say, well, you owe him 100, but why don't you give us 50 instead? And for the wheat, you owe 100, but give us 80. And you might say, well, that's not really fair to the master. But you see, we always have to remember the culture and the context of which these parables were written. And we don't really understand it today, but in the time period that Luke would have written down this account, it made a lot of sense. Because the people of the time and the Jewish people, they were not allowed to charge interest on goods. So the master would have given 50 originally of the olive oil or 80 of the wheat. And then there was this extra, and it wasn't considered interest, it was considered kind of like a commission. And part of that commission would go to the slave who was managing the account. So actually, this steward was cutting back his own commission. He was the one making the sacrifice. The guy who was the master, the owner, he still got what he was owed and a little bit extra. And it was not interest, it wasn't illegal in terms of money, because that's where the illegality came in, but rather it was affirmed because there was still a little extra to be there. So everybody kind of came out a winner because the steward kept his job and he was affirmed. The owner got what was owed to him and a little bit extra. And the people whose accounts that they were, who were in a relationship, well, those relationships were preserved. So Jesus is saying, be careful. He's speaking to the Pharisees, and he's speaking to people who, they were so hung up on their wealth, they couldn't give it away. And it was a block between them and God, because their whole identity, to the crowd that Jesus was addressing, their whole identity was caught up in who they were, what they had, what their status was. So Jesus is telling this parable to say you may have to give away, you may have to sacrifice, and also that you need to be concerned about the future, because all they were concerned about was accumulating. And he said, don't be all worried about just what happens on this earth, but you need to be worried about your future in the kingdom of heaven. And you need to be worried about what that future is. And I think this still speaks to us, as God's word is eternal. The divine word is not just written for people in a time period, but it has ramifications and relevance for all time. That in this 21st century, it's really very relevant, because today many people are caught up on what they have, who they are, what their status is, what their job is, where they live, and that's what's important. And sometimes we have to realize that how is it that our identity is not linked to what we own, to the mammon, but rather it is linked to our relationship with God. And if we want to have a better relationship with God, we better be worried about the future, because the future is not assured. If you are not worried about being a saint one day in heaven, you need to be. Because just that premise and putting that filter on all of our decisions can make a difference in our life. When we think about our relationships, our jobs, our business dealings, to say, what I'm doing, is this going to help me become a saint, or is it going to put me somewhere else? When we think next time that we're tempted maybe to get on the phone and start gossiping about someone, think about that. Put that filter on and say, do you know, I don't think this is going to help me to get into heaven. When we see things through that lens, it really helps us to be a better disciple here on earth today. And that comes with some pain. It can come with some decisions that we have to make that may mean we have to sacrifice or do without. And maybe it means that we're not going to feel good about everything because we're doing it for God, not for the world. Sacrifice can be a very good thing. It helps us in our relationship with God. And that's why the master affirmed the steward. It improved his relationship, because he said, wow, he's so concerned about his job. He's not taking it in a lackadaisical manner, but he's really concerned about it. He'll do whatever he can to be creative, still making sure I get paid, but also cushioning his own life and what his future would be. About 10, 12 years ago, I had the chance to go to our sister diocese in the Dominican Republic. And I talk about this today because around our diocese, we speak about it. It's what we were asked to do. But it has relevance to the scripture, because sometimes we have to make sacrifice in order to help another, and realize we cannot be so attached to our own goods here and our lifestyle that we forget about everybody else. And I went there to our sister diocese. It's in the central mountains of the Dominican Republic. It was in 2003, 2004, so 13, 12 years ago. So I remembered going, and I went on a construction mission. And I said yes to going, and I really received so much more than what I ever gave. Because what I found in that particular mission situation were people that did not have all the luxuries that we have, but they had something very often we don't have. And that is the gift of peace. Because I was on this construction mission, and I was called upon to plaster houses. I know nothing about plastering houses. I like to paint houses, I like to paint walls, but I cannot really plaster. I guess I wasn't doing a very good job because about 3 days into it, the sister who was in charge of the mission, she said, "Oh, you're going to come with me for 2 days and we're going to go up into the hills." I thought that's probably a good thing so that the houses maybe are still standing because my plastering maybe wasn't very good. So maybe that was a subtle message. I end up going up into the hills with the sister and to a little village there. And what I found there was these people who, they did not even have a bathroom. You know, it was a hole in the ground. It was very simple. I had never experienced something like that. And it's very humbling. But you know, it's amazing how after about 24 hours, it's all kind of normal. And I realized very quickly that I could do without as well. That in the simplicity of life, something that we all need as human beings is dignity, but we could sacrifice some of the other luxuries that we have. I woke up in the morning, I didn't know where I was sleeping. I was very tired, slept in this bed, and I woke up and behind me were like horses and donkeys. I don't know, I'm obsessed with donkeys today. So there were like donkeys, they were alive, they weren't in the well. And I was like with like a horsehair blanket. And usually I hit the snooze button a couple times, but in this situation, I was out of bed pretty quick because I didn't want to look and see what else was maybe on the floor or anywhere else in this place. It was, again, very simple. But what I found in this little village was there were 2 older men, and they're sitting on rocking chairs overlooking the beautiful, magnificent mountains of the central Dominican Republic. And they're overlooking them. They were just sitting there chatting, and there's like a plane that goes overhead. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if they, one, think about ever being on a plane, or they ever even think about going down that mountain and leaving that village. Did they ever think about what the world is beyond? I don't think they did, and I don't think they really cared that much because their basic needs were met. And I realized that happiness can come when the simple, basic needs are met. When I flew back, I didn't care for the food too much down there. I actually ate Cheetos and drank Coke all week long because the family that I stayed with, she made stuff and I didn't want to insult them, but I also didn't want to get sick. So I decided to be I'm kind of a picky eater, as I've told you before, burned chicken and lettuce. That's all I want to eat. So on the way back, I stopped at Cracker Barrel. I said, from the airport, my favorite place to go. I remembered looking at the silverware. And I was kind of amazed after a week of being in a place where they had silverware, but it was light, it was dirty. It probably had come from Orlando, maybe. Someone had sent it down there at some point, or I don't know where it came from, but I looked and it was like heavy silverware and the glass of water, and I didn't have to worry about drinking the water. And the food, I just remember thinking, wow, there's like a huge portion here, and this isn't what the people there were eating. And it was a real realization of how little we can have and find happiness and peace. I share that with you today, and I ask you, maybe you've already prepared and come with your envelope that was in the system. When we mail out the envelopes, I know you receive them. Maybe you receive them and you rip them up, or you put them in the shredder and you don't look through them. But there was one in there for the sister diocese this weekend. And in case you didn't bring that, or you're unregistered or whatnot, we have in the pews, the blue envelopes are here, or there might even be some special sister diocese ones. If you would like to make a gift today to our sister diocese, we're doing wonderful work there through education, through medical missions, construction, just overall improving the dignity of people. Maybe you have some change in your wallet or some extra cash today, and your envelope there, that's your gift wrap to the people of your gift to the Dominican Republic. So I would just ask you, if you are able to do something today, please feel free to do that and just place it in the envelope. You can put it in either of the collections. If you want it to go to the Dominican Republic, it has to be in the envelope. That's how we know that it's targeted for that. And know that we're grateful for your generosity. On behalf of the people who will receive the generosity and whose lives are improved, know that your sacrifice, maybe your cleverness, your creativity in budgeting and figuring out how to help other people may lead you to realize you can do with a little less. And when we do with less, we find something even more, because there's an incredible peace, a trust in God and in His will. And know that for your goodness today, God will reward you. He'll maybe get you out of the well and of the hole. For every situation, there is a solution, and the Lord helps us to find the gift of new life. When we are generous to others, we also rise above, and we take a higher road that God will bless us for, not just in this life, but if we're worried about the future, we need to be concerned about our actions today.